everyone. If you are a regular listener, welcome back. If you are new, what an episode to start on. You've probably read or used at least one of my guest books in your EFL teaching career. He's the author of such prestigious titles as Practical Grammar, Life and Telephone English. He's a most extraordinary man with a most ordinary name. Ladies and gentlemen, it's John Hughes. Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Everything EFL, my little podcast about English language teaching and other teachy stuff too. Credit and honourable mentions will be given during the episode or in the show notes. Let's crack on. Hi, John Hughes. Welcome to Everything EFL. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Erin. Thanks for inviting me along.
Good stuff, good stuff. Okay, so why don't you just introduce yourself for our listeners?
So my name's John Hughes. I'm now based in the UK, just outside Oxford, but I've worked overseas. Nowadays, I do quite a lot of teacher training. Before COVID, I did a lot of traveling, a lot of teacher training and presenting in different parts of the world. The other side of what I do is materials writing, course book writing. I'm probably best known for being one of the authors on the series Life with National Geographic Learning and also Business Result with Oxford University Press. But I'm connected with a number of different courses, at the moment.
Okay, some serious EFL chops there. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about authentic materials, focusing mostly on lower levels because you feel free to disagree, but my opinion is that sometimes it's a bit more difficult to find authentic materials for lower levels. And I think a lot of teachers, when they think of authentic materials, they might go straight to text-based, which, can be very difficult for low-level learners. So what things should teachers consider when selecting authentic materials for lower levels?
Yeah, I mean, my sort of catchphrase is just because the student has a lower level of English, it doesn't mean that they can't have higher levels of interest from the materials that we find. And that's always in my head when I'm writing materials. There's a danger typically that the more authentic material, the higher level it becomes. So you end up with a situation where the advanced level material is authentic, but the poor beginners and elementary students end up with something that's so stripped down and bare, it doesn't remotely resemble the real world. The only place you'd find it is in a beginner level English course book. So the challenge then is to bring authenticity to the lower levels. And yes, like you said, we often talk about texts in terms of written text, but of course, authentic materials includes, let's define it. We're talking photographs, video, audio. It might be a single sentence or phrase from a meme on the internet. It might be a 30-second video from YouTube or some kind of social media. It might not even be video that has words. It may be just 30 seconds of some action it's authentic and it gets students interested in the topic and exciting and generates discussion. So by authentic material, there's a danger. We're always talking about written text or listening text that are just contain a bunch of words that are too high level. And authenticity can be sort of many different things. It could be the photograph that you use at the beginning of the class. And if you think about photographs, typically, if you were doing a lesson called, family, and typically you go to the photo stock site or you look at certain kind of course books for beginner level, then it's this sort of model family. There's two parents of the opposite gender and three kids and a dog possibly. And
they're all smiling.
They're always happy. And of course, we'd all like our families to be like that, but they don't resemble families that I know. I mean, families are quite messy and complicated, and they're always taken in photographs with sort of clean sofas and a single hanging picture that's there. And it just doesn't resemble anybody's living room or the real world. And so authenticity at that level is perhaps not going to your typical photo stock site. It might be Well, there are lots of different image sites now where you can get kind of interesting images, and also some for free, some you have to subscribe to. Or of course, you just take your own photographs. I mean, it's pretty easy to get a decent photo now on your phone. You can just take your own photograph, and building up a bank of your own photographs is fine. And I think one of the hang-ups teachers has, if it's not from some other source, there's a sense, well, is it really authentic? Well, of course it is. I mean, it's, you took it, that's fine. Or similarly, we always think of authentic materials as something that comes from elsewhere or outside of the classroom. I mean, authentic material is when the student develops the material. If the student takes an interesting photo, bring it into class, integrate it some way. I mean, that's all authenticity.
Absolutely. Yeah, so many good points made there. Yeah, even something like a photo or a video, there's so much scope for communication, for vocabulary building. And, in the age of the internet and YouTube and social media, there are so many sources, like you say, that we can use there. And to do, with photos, like I was just thinking exactly the same thing as you, bring in your own photo, because students are generally interested in who you are. And if you show them a little snippet, a little side of yourself that they don't usually see in the classroom, that's good for forming connections as well. And then, of course, bringing in their own photos. Everyone loves talking about themselves. So, again, a really good source for communication and vocabulary building, and a bit of grammar thrown in maybe as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of thing brings in personalization, which makes
Yeah.
language learning more memorable. I mean, all of these things are kind of interconnected, aren't they?
Yeah. I think traditionally, some stuff that can be used with lower levels that are kind of easily obtainable would be your menus, your information leaflets, your maps. These things are good because they're generally not too long. Text form, they can be scanned easily for information. The information is set out in a certain format, which is often recognizable. But I think if teachers did just focus on just the text-based stuff, I think they'd really be missing out on a lot of stuff.
Well, also, we've just talked about photos, haven't we? And you've mentioned their texts like menus and things that are good for lower levels because they reflect the real world, but also they tend to be text types which combine images and text. And for lower levels, that's a much easier way into an authentic written text if there's something visual on the page. I mean, menus are a pretty good example of that. Usually menus have something visual about it, or the text is broken up, or like you say, a map of some kind. I'm thinking the other fantastic example is a completely new text type that's only emerged in the last 10 years, and that's infographic texts
Oh,
on
yeah.
the internet. And you just Google the word infographic in any topic. So if I put in infographic sport, I guarantee you that I don't know how many hundred people have created infographic texts where they're presenting data or information, say from a survey, and somebody's turned it into this infographic text full of visual images. And what's cool about it is you get the visual, but you then get these short little sentence level texts that go with it. I mean, I've used them quite a lot, particularly in business English. For example, if you type in work-life balance infographic, I'm sure somebody will have done a survey into the workplace and how much people are having to balance their working life and free time life. And there'll have been surveys on it, and somebody will have created this text type that's visually great because it illustrates, if it has a sentence, 50% of us work longer hours than we're expected to, or something like that, some kind of piece of data like that. They'll have probably produced a nice little image to go with it, which makes it far more accessible to the student. And it's probably those little visual tips will probably help the teacher clarify any unknown vocabulary. And there are also websites where the students can then make their own infographic. If you think about the new kinds of emerging text types that we've had in the last 10, 15 years, infographics are fantastic. Yeah.
Lovely. And also just visually attractive and therefore immediately engaging, which of course engagement is key, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the challenges we've got as teachers is getting students to read texts, because the kind of crazy thing is now, it's not a crazy thing, but if students eventually plan on passing, say, Cambridge exams or IELTS, quite often I've taught students where they look at the length of reading text and they say to me, that's longer than text I might read in my own language these days. I mean, students are so used to reading short text and getting
Yeah,
information through video that you've got this double challenge of getting them to read. And text types like infographics are a nice way into it. If you show that at the beginning of the lesson, students are probably more motivated and interested than they might be if you show them a 1,000 word text from a piece of academic writing. Now, maybe they have to eventually read that kind of dense text, but you kind of need to, particularly at lower levels, you're trying to sort of build up
definitely
their
work
reading
up to it.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about photos a little bit. How would you use some photos in a low-level learning environment?
It depends. I've got there's sort of two reasons I think for using photos. There's the photos we use simply to clarify a word, in which case I might go to a website like Pixabay, which is really good if you just type, like if I want to teach the word keys, I know that I will find a nice simple stock image of a set of keys. So there's that level of use of photographs. And then there's more the kind of photograph you need to open the lesson and start discussion. So you quite often need a photo, and this is where authentic images become important, because you want photos that generate discussion or automatically get the students thinking, like, who are the people in the picture, what's happening, and then you can open that, what might happen next, or what's just happened. There's different ways of using it. The test of a good authentic photo for me is if I automatically quickly look at it and I start thinking of questions as a teacher or a materials writer that I would ask with that image.
Mm.
Good photos automatically ask questions because they have interesting people in them. And you think, well, what's going on? Why is that person there? What's happening? That images, good classroom images should do that. And they often work. You can use them more than once. I mean, particularly for low levels, I might bring in an authentic image, maybe of two people. If it was two people talking in an unexpected place, maybe they're inside a tunnel or somewhere mysterious, you might use the photo once to teach vocabulary, and then you might bring it into the next lesson to recycle that vocabulary, but then ask some more kind of what I'd call higher order thinking type questions that get students imagining what is going on. Or you might say to them, okay, there's two people talking in the photo, get into pairs, write me the dialogue that you think they're having.
Yes, lovely.
And good photos, we do all of this work to prepare materials and find materials. You want to make sure it has it should have mileage. It shouldn't just be used once in a lesson for 2 or 3 minutes. Try to find a photo that you can bring back to the next lesson. There's also this images that photos are so good for stimulating memory that if you've used a photo in one lesson, you bring it back a week later and you taught some vocabulary with it, using the same image kind of activates the student's memory, and they make that visual connection back to the lesson and think, oh yeah, that was the lesson and we talked about this, this and this. I just think there's a greater chance of students remembering that vocabulary. But then if you can do something else with the image as well, like, I don't know, get them to write a dialogue or write a story, like say, this is the photo shows the beginning of the story, what happens next, any of that kind of creative thinking type stuff is good.
Yeah, that's great. I love that, exploiting the photo and not just using it once and bringing it back for review. There's nothing wrong with going over stuff you've already done, but then, like you say, add something else onto it, which is really, really nice. You could also use them, speaking about higher order thinking, you can do like compare and contrast with photos as well. You could add speech bubbles, create like, back in the day, we would take the photos ourselves with a disposable camera, develop them, give them to the students, and they would stick it on sugar paper and write their speech bubbles. But nowadays, you can just give them some images.
Showing your age, Darren, you're showing your age.
I know. Oh, how things have changed. Yeah, and then with grammar, you could maybe, like, one thing I like to do is have a photo of, say, my sister, and I'll explain who she is and what she's doing in the photo, and then they can ask questions if they like, and then they have to find a photo of someone they know and use the present simple and continuous to talk about the photo and what the person's doing in the photo as well. And this can lead to all kinds of questions to do with family and what are they doing? Show me another photograph. So the resources are there on the students' phones as well, which is brilliant.
Yeah, and I like that idea of if you bring in one photo showing something, and then you say to the students, can you bring in a photo on the same topic, and then they compare that. That idea of comparing photos is interesting, particularly if it's an authentic image, say from, I don't know, from a newspaper or magazine, and it's showing maybe one family, and then they bring in their family picture and you're contrasting them. It gives the student a kind of relationship to the sort of that authentic image from elsewhere, and an image they bring in themselves. I also think with images, there's all sorts of great free tech now. I mean, one of my favorite sites is called Photobabble. It's spelt with an F rather than a PH, Photobabble. And you upload your photo and then you record yourself describing the photo. And
Oh.
the student can then record themselves. You can password it as a teacher. If you set up the password, students can all go and look at each other's photos and listen to the recording. So it means that you can actually set a speaking task for homework, for example. So instead of just saying, write your description for homework, you can say, actually record your description for homework, and then we'll listen to each other's recordings about the photo. I mean, other tools will do it as well, but Photobabble is just one that I've used in the past, and it's nice to combine it with the images there. And again, it's students creating the authentic content.
Brilliant, all coming from the student.
Yeah.
Guys, any reference to any website or app or anything like that will be going on the show notes, so don't panic. Now, let's talk about text for lower levels. We did discuss it, I think, very, very briefly in our last conversation. If you take a text and you don't think it's suitable for a lower level, is it possible to adapt it, but the text still be authentic?
For me, it is. I mean, it depends. You've got to be careful you don't strip out all the authenticity. But for me, I mean, I spent a lot of time at conferences listening to debates about what is authenticity. And I've heard people come out with statements like, as soon as a piece of text arrives in the classroom, it stops being authentic. Things like that have been said.
Sounds like a
Uh,
riot.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I don't go to those talks anymore. For me, it's authenticity is not just about the actual text, it's partly about the authenticity of the information. I mean, 20 years ago, when I used to write texts, I could make up the text so that it incorporated whatever the language point was. If I wanted to teach narrative tenses, I could just write a story using narrative tenses. Or if I wanted it to be an authentic text, I could just make it up. Nowadays, as soon as you take a text into a classroom, students can Google the person's name in it or the location, find out if it's really true or not. So you don't do that. So first of all, there's authenticity of information. Is what you're presenting actually true?
Okay.
And actually, I think that's kind of important, because if you've chosen a good text that's interesting, after the lesson, students will be interested in going online and finding out more about it. I mean, you know when you've got it right when students leave the class and they're still thinking and talking about the text that you use in the class, and they're thinking, oh, is that true? Is that real? I want to find out more about it. Then you know you've got it right. So there's authenticity of information, and then there's authenticity of text. If I have an interesting topic and I have a source text, or I might have 3 or 4 different texts providing me with information, then you kind of have to look at the text and think, how much of the original vocabulary or text can I kind of make use of here? Obviously, if you take a text and you don't change it that much, you've also got the issue of, are you going to get permission off the original author and so on. But if you're just creating a text, like quite often I write text on a topic, but I might go and do research in different areas. For me, that's still an authentic text, but I've rewritten it using language that the students can follow. But it goes back to this idea of trying to find a topic that's high level interest.
I think what might put some teachers off of doing something like that is just the time it takes. But I think I would argue that you generally use the same materials and same course books, you have the same curriculum. So if you are creating a text that you know you're going to use again and again, I think it's worth taking the time to adapt it.
Yeah, I mean, all materials writing takes time, which is
Mm.
why, you know, people want course books to some extent. I mean, that's what they provide. But if you're creating the content yourself and you're taking also about authentic materials, one of the reasons for doing it is to source a piece of material that's relevant to your students, because no course book can match exactly the needs of your class or the interests of your class all the time. And your students might be interested in a particular topic. Maybe there's some event going on in their country and they want to be able to talk about it in English. Well, then you have to source authentic texts about it. And yeah, it does take time. I mean, it's work, it's effort, and that's another reason. Yeah, you need to choose texts that will last this, you know, the test of time. It goes, if you're choosing text, you're often looking for text that will be, you can use more than once, aren't you? You don't want it just to sort of be current that week, although sometimes we do that. But you're looking for text that actually will last sort of 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
the relevance.
Yeah, a few years ago I did like something like top 10 social media sort of lingo, like, you know, on fleek and things like that. And I'm not sure that's relevant anymore. And it took me forever to put together, but at the time it was great. Now I'd probably have to, you know, update it a little bit.
I mean, I have my standard go-to World Cup lesson, which is relevant, authentic once every 4 years, basically. And I update it so it matches with whatever the country is the World Cup's taking place in every 4 years. But the basic structure and the vocabulary more or less remains the
Mm.
same.
That's a great option though, isn't it? Like choosing something quite universal like that and then just having to make a few changes every now and then. That's really nice.
Yeah, and in general, even if students aren't entirely interested in football, they're kind of interested in the event and they know it's going on. So it's, you know, those kinds of. Similarly, I mean, the Olympic Games is coming up in theory, and
Who
so
knows?
who knows? So I mean, once every 4 years, you do your Olympic Games lesson, and you know, if you take some authentic stuff from the Olympic website and play around with it, yeah, it's, you know, it's going to get reused, isn't it?
Yeah, brilliant. So in our last conversation, you mentioned the use of text checkers to help with evaluating the language in an authentic text. Can you just expand on that and just explain exactly what that is?
Only that when you take authentic texts, the more experience we get, the better we get at identifying which vocabulary, for example, is going to cause difficulty. Say, for if you're looking at a text and thinking, I want to use this with A2 level students, you look at it and you think, well, which vocabulary is going to cause difficulty? What we have nowadays, if you don't want to trust your intuition, and even people who've been teaching a long time, actually, they can be surprised to discover that a word they thought was a B2 level word turns out it's a C1 or it's a B1. So there are free online text checkers. I often use the Oxford Text Checker from Oxford University Press, but there's plenty of others out there. There's the English Profile from Cambridge. Pearson has the GSC text analyzer, which will analyze. Basically, the basic principle is you copy your piece of text, you paste it into this screen, and then it analyzes it and color codes the words, tells you which words are A1, which are A2, which are B1, and so on. And it will analyze the text and give you the percentages. So it might say, this text, 2% of this text is at B2 level and the rest is B1 and below. Well, if you're choosing a reading text for B1 students and only 2% of the text is sort of at B2 level, you'd probably be fairly confident that that text is okay for that group.
It's great.
I mean, the thing is, for adjusting level, it's not only about just changing the vocabulary, it's also about sentence structure. So the classic example, if the text has a relative clause in it, then normally sort of the issue of defining non-defining relative clauses doesn't get introduced until about B1 level. So if the text has a relative clause in and I want to use it with A2 level, I'd have to think carefully about whether I'm okay leaving it in there or whether I want to simplify it. Maybe I'll turn that sentence into two separate sentences rather than leaving the relative clause in.
Yeah, that's a
Or
good.
passive forms is another example. Would I strip out the passive form, turn it into an active? Those kind of decisions you're going to have to make according to, what kind of grammar you've already taught the students, what you think they're ready to deal with.
Okay, yeah, good point. Not just language, but sentence structure as well. Okay, let's talk about silent videos. I've used some with some low-level classes before, like Mr. Bean, I always find good. What I generally tend to do is like have a list of like the events in the video cut up. They have to order them, watch the video, check, that kind of thing, answer some questions, maybe talk about Mr. Bean's character. I think there's so much you can do with silent videos because there's no language. You have the opportunity to create what you want out of it, really, and create what you want your students to get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, video now, sort of 2005 was the turning point because it was the year that YouTube suddenly arrived.
Yeah.
And before that, we'd all had to use VHS cassettes and CD players. And doing a video lesson was a complete nightmare normally in class.
Yep.
I remember one of the first schools I ever taught at, they bought a huge VHS player. For any teachers under the age of about 30, a VHS player was this enormous box, and the video was an enormous thing, and the TVs were enormous. But they marketed their language school on the strength that every term the students would have a video lesson.
Yeah,
And
you'd
so
wheel the TV in, wouldn't you, on that great big wheelie thing?
yeah, but we had to sort of set aside one lesson per term, and somebody created a load of worksheets to go with a film or a comedy thing like Faulty Towers or something. And then students basically watched the video, filled in a comprehension checklist. And after 45 minutes, you'd switch the lights back on in the classroom, discover that students had understood none of the video because it was just too high level and weird, and video lessons, I hated
Subtitles.
them. Yeah, and then suddenly YouTube came along and I could show a 30-second video just to stimulate interest at the beginning of the lesson. They're off. And like you say, you could either use silent videos or you just turn the sound off and say, what do you think this person's saying? That kind of use of video. You could even take an authentic piece of video where what the person's saying was above level, but you could still show the video with the sound off and say to the students, what do you think the person's talking about? And you don't even need to actually play the sound with it. You can just use it as stimulation. I have to say, though, I still think that if you want silent videos, the best ones to go back to are people like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. One, because students are just intrigued by it, because you don't really see that stuff anymore. It's black and white. And the issue of black and white's interesting. Also, black and white images are interesting because you remove color and somehow it focuses attention in different ways. When students look at a color photo and you say, what does the photo show? They'll talk about colors. Remove the color and they have to talk more about what's really going on in a photo. And black and white video is the same. So I used to teach, I spent 6 months working in a car parts factory in Italy many years ago, and I worked with engineers who had to learn English. And one of my favorite ones was Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, because the first
With the
minute
factory.
all happens in the factory.
Yeah.
And it's in black and white. There's no voices, of course, but Chaplin is just brilliant at acting, and it's a bit like why people use Mr. Bean. It's all so over the top that if you want to teach, low-level phrasal verbs and nouns for talking about technical processes or introducing passives, it's just the best video ever made for it. It's 10 minutes of everybody laughs, and then you watch it again, and then you can input all the vocabulary to talk about it.
I love that idea.
You'll find it if you put in Chaplin Modern Times. You'll find it on YouTube. But if you teach engineers or anybody to do with factory processes, it's a whole lesson, believe me.
Amazing. Yeah. No, YouTube has just opened up so many possibilities. I remember doing us all singing, I put up the karaoke version of the Titanic song. You know, we'd
Right.
done it in class. It's a relatively simple song, not to sing, but you know, the lyrics. So we had a nice little karaoke session. You know, there's just so much you can do with YouTube.
I don't know if we're mentioning websites in particular, but
Absolutely. Ah,
lyricstraining.com, I mean,
yes.
that takes authentic videos. Loads of people already know about it, but it does. I always go back to it because the concept is so simple. But it's, if you think of all the students in the world, even particularly when I was a teenager, I just listened to cassettes in those days and transcribed the lyrics of my favorite song. Students just, if you get the right song that's current at the moment, and send the students the lyrics training, and they have a go at filling in the gaps to go with the song. I mean, it's great stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, or students can choose the song themselves, even
exactly.
better. Yeah,
Yeah.
lovely. Okay. Well, why don't we kind of stay on topic and diverge over to social media a little bit? Yeah, this is really interesting to me. I have to say, I haven't done a lot with social media with lower levels or with any levels really. I've talked about kind of language and stuff, but um, how, apart from lip syncing to your favorite song on TikTok or something, what else could you use it for?
I mean, I think you get sort of one thing is like memes are quite interesting because they're
Yeah.
just a single image with a single sentence, and so and there's usually something interesting, or the meme is saying something. Quite often, memes have a message that you have to kind of dig at a little bit, and so that sort of stuff with single sentences is good for the lower levels.
Yeah, I think also if you supported that with, you know, what does this mean? And if you know they're going to have trouble with it, give them three options,
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. And at least they've got the language there to say what they think. Yeah, I love that.
Or adverts are still very good. They always have been, because adverts quite often may have a couple of words or a short slogan or something. So if you can show students a real image, remove the slogan and say, can you write the slogan, or what do you think it's advertising? And then you show them the rest of the advert with the text. That kind of work can work quite well. And social media is a bit tricky in as much as if you're encouraging students to go online to social media, you've got issues of, I mean, one thing that's COVID's thrown up is there are students who have access to the internet and have all the technology at home, and those that don't. So you've got to be a little bit careful with that. And there's also where they end up on social media and those kinds of issues, which makes it a bit tricky at time. I mean, I will find things on social media and bring them to the lesson rather than send students too much off onto the social media. But
Yeah.
there's plenty of teachers working, say, have classes with their WhatsApp group, and sharing images. I mean, I have a student at the moment, and he loves WhatsApp, so I send him his homework on WhatsApp, and then we share photos or videos. I was doing cooking with him. He wanted to tell me about a dish from his country, and first of all, he sent me a video he got from some website, or it was on a social media site, and the guy was doing a cookery class in the middle of the desert and showing how to make some kind of dish from his country. And then we talked about it, and I said, okay, for homework, can you now make me a video of you cooking? So he cooked a dish from his country and did a presentation while I think his wife was holding the camera, and then they shared the video with me.
Probably
So
shouting instructions to him as well.
I don't know, but it was taking that sort of short video that was just somebody somewhere in the middle of the desert who'd recorded it, shared it on Facebook or something, and then this guy gets it, shares it with me, and it becomes the basis for a whole lesson. So there's those little things that just come up by accident to some
Yeah,
extent.
you never know where inspiration may strike. Yeah, always try and get my classes, whatever level, to start a WhatsApp group together so they can communicate. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I often find if you nominate an administrator who, when you get new students coming in, they say we've got a WhatsApp group. You get they get their number on it. That tends to work quite well. And Another thing that my friend said is that he encourages students, like if they're on Instagram or something, follow English speaking celebrities. Who do they like? Who's their favorite singer? Who's their favorite actor? Follow them on Instagram if they're English speaking. So at least they'll have just something there. Again, just a little bit more exposure to images and language. They can read comments, they can add comments if they're feeling brave, stuff like that. So it's kind of interactive as well.
I think, yeah, I mean, you get that. And I think one quite interesting trend at the moment, particularly with TikTok videos and stuff, is people talking, doing 30-second videos, but then they overlay bits of language on it. There's little captions that pop up and stuff like that with little bits of English and stuff. And I think some teachers are worried about dealing with that because they don't necessarily understand it themselves. But the students, I mean, if you let the students run with it, the students will just they'll personalize it and create the authenticity themselves to some extent.
Which segues nicely onto materials that students can create themselves, which is brilliant because there's creative thinking involved, you know, that kind of stimulation and motivation for students to produce something is there. What kind of advice would you give for that?
I think that the challenge is how hands-on are you going to be? So if you want students to create some kind of content of their own, quite often it's nice to have used something in class which is authentic there as a model for them to follow,
Yeah.
and then get them to it. But I never forget, I was working with some teachers from the Ukraine, and I presented an idea I'd done in class where if you're doing the unit of a course book, as a revision activity, you give students the title from the unit of the course book and say, for homework, I want you to take me a photo with that title. So if the title of the unit was challenges, for example, for homework, they'd have to go off, take a photo with the title challenges and search for something, and then come back to class and be ready to present it. So they'd have to prepare the English they needed to present their photo to the rest of the class or to tell their partner about it. And there was a Ukrainian teacher who wrote to me and said, well, I did that with my students, but one group got together and they decided it was a bit of a boring homework. So they got together in a group of 3 or 4 and they decided they were going to make a video. And I think the unit had been on the topic of food. And so rather than just take the photo, they went off and went to all the different restaurants they liked around their town and stood outside, and they did like a TV program that they just created with the video. And the video was fantastic. And they even sort of subtitled key words that had come up in the lesson just to show the teacher that they had included the vocabulary. I mean, it was that, they were
Wow.
that motivated. And I thought, wow, there's some motivated students, but clearly this is a very special teacher who can motivate. But I think that was an example of where a teacher sets the task, has given them enough in class so that they can do it themselves. They know what they have to do, but she's also a teacher who said, but you know that in my class, if you want to go the extra mile and do something else, that's fine, get on with it. And it's that level of control, isn't it? How controlling you are, and whether students know that you're just giving them the seeds of an idea through showing them a text type, and then they run off and create their own text type, how much freedom you give.
Yeah.
So there's, I mean, you obviously want, I mean, you can set the boundaries and say to students, I want you to say, for example, if you looked at a reading text, you might say, I want you to write a similar kind of text which contains these key words or expressions. And it's just a question of how much you balance that, or how much freedom you give to the students to add their own little sparkle to the whole thing.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of giving students choice.
Yeah.
And something like that, something like this where they create something, it gives them a sense of ownership. It's autonomous. But I think a key thing is giving them a task that is also achievable as well. You know, because I mean, if you just say make a video, you know, students might panic. But if you layer it and scaffold it and support them and say you've got some choices, you can do this. Here's the vocabulary you need to use. If you set it up and you structure it correctly, who knows what you could get out of it.
Yeah, there's also always that danger that they spend so much time on the technical aspects of it and sorting out the video that the language almost becomes secondary, and then people in the group or other students start to question the time that they're having to spend on this when they could be doing what they perceive as, you know, better, more important work on learning language. So you've got to get that balance right to some extent.
I do think that comes down to your instructions though. And again, how you structure it and your expectations and things like that. So I think it's all to do with how you deliver the instructions and how you structure the task. I think you can sort of get over it. And if it's a group, they need to be assigned roles as well. So that, like in your traditional project kind of lesson, you know, they might have to produce a picture of something, and it's very like common for two students to be staring at one student drawing something for like half an hour, whereas if we've all done it, you know, but if you assign them, right, okay, you're drawing, but you've got 15 minutes, you're writing the presentation, you're doing this, if you assign them roles and everyone knows what they're doing and everyone has a very clear expectation, then I think you can overcome that to some extent. You'll always get a messer, but you can overcome it.
It's never smooth. I've tried it different. I've tried it like that, where you're setting out, and then I've done other ones where the group has to nominate the leader and they have to decide how it's going to be run. That was, for example, in a business school context where I wanted them to develop management skills as well. And you'd always end up with the one student who was the sort of the motivator and the doer. And inevitably within a group of 4 people, there were those sort of people ran around doing stuff, and then there was always the one student on the sideline saying, "What are we doing?" And you know, I mean, that's just what happens when you have groups of humans together. That's not just students. That's just people working in teams, isn't it?
So, where can people find you on social media, John?
Well, I have my own website, which is johnhugheselt.com, and that has information about books and presentations and training and recordings and links to things. And it also has a blog section, but that also has videos that I make. I have a YouTube channel, which is John Hughes ELT, where I try to put up short videos. I try to keep them short and quick because I tend to make the videos that I like to watch. If it's too long, I'll stop watching it. So so you can find me there, and then I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. Am I anywhere else? I'm on Instagram a bit, not that often, and I used to be on Twitter, but I'm no longer on Twitter.
No. Fair enough. You can't be everywhere at once. You have to pick and choose your social media platforms, I think.
Exactly.
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
But if the starting point, johnhugheselt.com, and you'll find me that way. And you can also contact me via that website as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it. And I think that anyone listening can take something practical away from this discussion. If you enjoyed this episode, guys, hit that subscribe button. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Comment and engage with me and my followers on social media. Leave me a kind review on Apple or Spotify. It goes a long way. And let's just share the love. Bye.